Hello and welcome everyone in another episode of Research as Celebrity. Today we have honor of having Professor Ravi Manjithaya with us. A little brief about Dr. Ravi. He has done his bachelor's in microbiology from KTHM College, Nasik, and then his master's in microbiology from University of Pune. For his PhD, he joined Indian Institute of Sciences, one of the most elite institutes for research in India, and then he moved to United States of America to do his PhD for postdoc at University of California, San Diego. Then awarded a Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance Intermediate Fellowship, came back to India, joined JNCASR, and currently serving there as a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, which is JNCSR. Thank you very much for this brief introduction. We'll
Thank you.
welcome Dr. Ravi.
Thank you.
So we are honored to have you, sir, here, and we always start our conversation by our standard question that how and when you decided to become a researcher.
Well, it's not an easy question. There are many opportunities or instances where I thought maybe doing research is a good option. First one, I think in our bachelor's, there were a few experiments that we were doing, and microbiology experiments were quite elaborate. So I really enjoyed doing those, although I did not know what was research and things like that. There were a couple of teachers in the zoology department and elsewhere also who were encouraging us. And in my master's, we again had a project that we need to do. And there was a lot of liberty given to choose the project. So that was one of the first times where we felt that somebody is not telling us what to do, but we can think and whatever we want to do. So we did some crazy experiments at that time, and our teachers were very encouraging and guiding us properly. So it sounded like a lot of fun. There was one particular instance where a very big, I think, entrepreneur used to come in Contessa Classic, which was one of the big cars those days. I think his name was Dr. Gosavi, and he would do some experiments on his own. And I would find that very interesting that he's leaving all of his empire and still coming to a department and doing some experiments. And I used to chat with him often. And when ISE opportunity came for application, I was not very sure that I wanted to apply. But he said, look, all you have is an opportunity. Whether you get selected or not is not in your hands. So at least don't let go of the opportunity thinking about a few hundred rupees. That stuck with me, I think. And that really changed the course of what I wanted to do. And of course, coming to ISC, then it was a no-brainer. It was like an ocean of science and research and people doing so many different things. It was wonderful.
So you started your research journey without knowing where you are getting into, with
Yeah,
your
yeah,
initial
absolutely.
experiments at bachelor's and master's. And then I would like to say that the entrepreneur with the luxury was one of the reasons which motivated you to at least apply for the IASA.
Now, when I
Getting
look back, that's what I think. I mean, now if I had to really look back, for many years I didn't realize that was the reason.
Mhm.
But now when I reflect back and what has happened, I think it's a very small thing, but that may have triggered an opportunity.
Absolutely. And this is now we'll start the story in getting admission into ISA. I'm I can only assume that it was not easy at that time, is not easier at this time, and I'm seeing not getting easy ever. So
Yeah, yeah.
with the experience of getting admitted to IASC and then to completing, let's start with the journey of your PhD, which was a long time back.
Yeah, it was a long time back. Again, there are small things that made a difference, I think. First of all, I was somehow never confident. I had my father and we had a big joint family, and they had a restaurant business, small restaurant business. And my future was sealed. I was surely finishing my master's and going back. And getting an opportunity to apply ISC was just one of those things one would have tried. I did that, and I was pretty sure that there are much smarter kids in the class, my colleagues, than me. So I thought I will never get a chance to go. But surprisingly, I was shortlisted for the interviews after the written test. And I saw myself jumping onto the general compartment of that first train that goes to Bangalore. And I have a wonderful aunt and my cousins, and they are scholars. So staying with them gave an impression of being in an academic environment and seeing what kind of heights they were reaching. It propelled me also to do well. But it was very difficult. ISC, I went there and three departments, three interviews, two. And I think out of the six interviews, four I flunked big time. I was not even confident. I was not knowing what I was talking. One happened pretty late in the day after waiting for the whole day, and they all wanted a tea break. And I was the last interviewer before that, and so that got over very quickly. And but I think there was one particular professor, Nanjundaya, who had a very unique way of interviewing. He would ask about my hobbies and then slip in the academic question. I thought that relaxed me a bit and gave me an opportunity to talk about what is the interesting scientific experiments that I've read that really impressed me, and I wanted to talk about it. So that I would express myself at that point of. I think so that happened, and then I got into ISC, got a lot of exposure, different challenging questions. The lab in which I was not doing the research question that I was given to, so I had to really sort of invent many processes and had to reach out to many places. And that's how I learned that you need not stay in your room and do research or in your lab and do research. You can reach out, talk to people, and that fun of exploration and collaboration helped me a lot actually. So there were many instances where I got input from many people. I had an extremely good advisor in Professor Rajan Dige. He was a very meticulous person. He believed in getting excellent results, reproducible results over and over again, and emphasized on a lot on controls and things like that. And so that sort of ingrained in me quite early that it's not very easy to just do something and publish, but you know, to bide your time and learn. He also wanted a lot of data. He said you should have a big body of work to do PhD, not just do some trivial thing. So I was trying day in and day out, and some of my seniors and colleagues were very good in terms of way they were handling their projects and all. I got to learn a lot from them, and of course, they were good colleagues. So all in all, it was extremely memorable. One of the best years in my life that I've spent, I can recollect.
I must admit here at this point of time that you are the first person who I have heard saying that the best time of their life was their PhD. Because I always see the stories vice versa. And I second that because for me also, I think my best time, if I have to ask, anyone will ask me, I'll say during my PhD, I enjoyed the life, the research, and everything what
Yes,
I. So now let's talk about when there was an established business of your own home. People were like that was waiting for you. You chose to go through a path where you were not confident, as you said. You were not
yeah,
confident for like what will you do for your PhD?
yeah.
How will it go? So taking that unconventional path where you are not very comfortable also, what were the reasons you go it that way? And obviously now we can see that it went really well, that becoming a professor at JNCASR is the dream for so many researchers who are either doing their PhD or doing their postdoctoral fellowships outside India. So let's talk about that part.
Well, yeah. So I come from a joint family. Nowadays, you don't get to see them, but some 21 or 25 first cousins I have, some seven uncles I have, always bumping into each other. But my father was a real inspirational figure. He was one of the only ones who was well educated in the family and always encouraged us to pick up education and go in that direction rather than end up in the restaurant. I used to help him, and by the time I finished my bachelor's and master's, I was almost ready to help him full time and take care of the whole thing. So, but he always said that you should try and see what's your potential. And so when these opportunities came, I also got an opportunities in BARC, Bark, closer to Nashik. So everybody thought that I'll get a government job and settle there. But there were professors surprisingly in Bark who told me that if you get ISC, don't even think twice. So when I got ISC, it was like I had discovered nuclear bomb or something like that. Everybody was like, you just have to go. Don't even, there's no question of thinking about anything. It was a brave decision because for some reason, exactly around that time, The entire business had collapsed, and dad was in debt. He had to let go of his restaurant. And if I had to save it and revive it, that was the time. So either come back and save the family business, or just, start thinking about doing PhD and see how the career goes. So I was not sure. But I think my dad pushed me. My mom supported me quite a bit. I had two excellent sisters who were always backing me. So that was surprising. Now, when I look back, anybody else would say, "Stay back with your dad. He needs you. Help out the business." But they said, "Don't worry about anything here," and they really managed the home and everything else. And I would just go back and start doing my work.
And this is something which we always say, that the support system, either your family
Yeah,
or
yeah,
your friends, these are the support system for any human, and researchers are no exception to that. As you
yeah, yeah.
mentioned, their motivation and the reason why you are a researcher now and not doing the business, because of the support you all get from your family. For this, now we'll talk about the PhD in IASC. And as you have said, you had brilliant and atmosphere, teaching experiences, whatever you have learned there. First thing which made you leave India to United States, the reasons why you did that, and then the reason you came back. And in between, we'll talk about the journey of your postdoctoral experience at United States.
Yeah, so I think it was not a very difficult decision. I was not the kind of person who used to give a lot of thought. I would go with the flow. So when PhD happened, PhD happened. When research questions came through, we did that work. And when somebody told me this is the way to do it, and everybody told me this is, I was very happy the support system would help me move forward. I would move forward. One thing that was very prevalent at that time was that ISU was a great place to get trained. But in terms of being scientific productivity and getting the kind of infrastructure support and ability to really push yourself to the limit, that opportunity, many of them believe going into good universities and research institutions abroad was a way forward. And it was true. I had seen students and my colleagues, seniors, juniors, everybody who didn't do so very well in ISC in terms of publications and things like that, were publishing Cell Science and Nature paper when they got a chance to go abroad. So it looked like a very transformative procedure that one has to go through. And secondly, what I heard back from my seniors was that it's a way of life also one learns. The culture there is different, people are different, how people interact, how they treat each other, how ideas are shared, how projects are driven is a different it's a different thing that one should experience at least in a life. So all this worked out in the sense when I was close to finishing my work and I was writing my papers and things like that. Professor Suresh Subramani had come to, I think, biochemistry department at that time to give a talk. And those days, it was not unusual that a final year student would look for every person who's coming to give a talk and see if there's an opportunity for a postdoc position and talk. Because many times, those days, internet was not that common that you would just keep writing emails and having chats like this, what we're doing now. And so one-on-one would be the easiest way. And it was also not uncommon that the professor would immediately offer you that I have a position. Why don't you consider this? And something like that happened uh, even before I could think about. There was also another Nobel laureate, Susumu Tonegawa, who had come to NCBS at that time to give a talk. And he also was interested. But that was a huge jump for me, leaving what my field and going into neuroscience. So I had to decide between the two. But I'm glad that in the long run, I decided to take something that I can build and build on my own. That is cell biology.
Nice. So now let's talk about the imposter syndrome also. You just mentioned that when you have to take these decisions, and now in the current generation of researchers, it has been seen that PhD in altogether plant sciences, and then postdoctoral in animal sciences or neurobiology or whatnot. So, how you see the connect of these two, and how you guide our new PhD students or the one who are finishing their PhD, how open they should be, and what are the things which they should be very focused about while making decisions for their postdoctoral training.
Yeah, it's not an easy question to answer. In my time, I noticed something very interesting. There were a lot of people, colleagues of mine and students who would take 6 years or more, finish PhD, and they would get a little saturated with the field. So they always wanted to do a fresh start, in something that became a passion for them. So somebody would jump to neuroscience because they could not do any neuroscience in their PhD, for instance, and they wanted to try that. I also got into that mood. I went to asking around people about different fields and thinking about going to exotic places to do research and things like that. So, but it's also important that if we are passionate, like I was passionate about microbiology and cell biology, that we think that we should grow in that field and acquire what do you call new set of skills and new thought processes that will help us grow as a cell biologist, as a researcher. Diversifying helps in some sense because you are sure that you don't want to continue a PhD. Almost all of them, all of us rather, who end up having a career in research follow our postdoctoral journey more mostly than PhD journey. As a result, it's important to pick what we want to do. I don't have any problems with the new generation because they do so much research now. They are much more certain about what they want and things like that. And now with the internet and exposure, they can talk to people and pick and choose what they want to do. In our times, it was more of a gamble. You felt that the lab was good, the PI was good, and the projects would be certainly good, and that's the field you wanted to go. So you would go with a very open mind and open heart.
About when you mentioned about the interview style, when you got interviewed at IASA, and then there was this one professor asking about your hobbies, making you comfortable, and then now asking about the research questions. How it goes in your lab when you are in this position, when you are interviewing this candidates who are looking, who are desperate to join your lab because of your repute.
Absolutely. So whatever we learn and see in the life, we don't learn only two things: what to do and what not to do.
Yes.
So, so one of the things we always, nowadays students come from far off places, sometimes even from northeast, or even we had from really northern parts of the country, and so on. So we always have to ask them, what do you like? What are your hobbies? What did you have for breakfast, for instance? Is this your first time you're coming to Bangalore? And something like that. And it's surprising sometimes, for example, a simple talk like having, did you have breakfast? I came to know that somebody was very excited to talk about breakfast because they had first time in their life had idli, and
Mm-hmm.
because they came down to south, they were from Kashmir or something. And so all this can be suddenly a very revealing thing about culture and things like that. And it establishes some kind of a communication through which you can ask comfortable questions. And also many times the interviews, at least for me, is to know more of the student, how the student has been trained in what subjects and has what good concepts in. Is not trying to find out what that person doesn't know. I think in that sense, if we start interviewing me also, I will also tell you so many things that I still don't know. So getting out what they know is the bigger challenge. And so unless we establish some kind of a easy communication process, it's difficult to get out answers many times.
So now I'll ask the second stage of this question, that if a person is looking or seeking an admission in your lab, what are the things you expect them to come prepared?
Yeah, so there is no golden mantra. So first, when I became a professor, I thought I will ask all my seniors, professors, what is the golden mantra to really take a good student? And turns out there is none. But what has steadfast stood by me in terms of whatever I've seen and I've tried out are only two things. First, I look for some reason. Some student is really passionate, genuinely passionate about wanting to do the kind of work that is happening in the lab, and has an interest, has read about it, and that passion is of utmost importance for me, because I know that even in difficult times, it's this passion that will drive them and keep them. And second thing, which I think also is important, I try to see if their basics are good. So if they had a solid foundation in understanding fundamental concepts and things like that at the easy level, so that there is no confusion going forward as they make their hypothesis and do research and things. So these two things, I think, if I'm there, I'm more or less happy many times.
So if I may ask that, if a student who's passionate enough, can you say that passion guarantees the success?
See, success, there is again no great mantra, but if somebody is at it all the time,
Mhm.
I think there's a very high probability of getting succeeding, right? And
Okay.
how does one always get at it, right? So either you have to be a very dogmatic person who just has a nature like that, and passion really helps. So if the passion stays for a long time, even today, one of the things I keep telling my students is that I don't have to worry that morning 9 o'clock if they're coming to the lab or not. If they're passionate, they will get up, they will come, and they will try something, they'll discuss something if things are not worked and things like that. I don't have to keep pushing them every time that we have to do this experiment, we have to go ahead, time is running out, and those things don't happen all the time. Everybody goes through up and downs, but by and large, I think passion helps you overcome because you're genuinely interested in.
Absolutely. And now I would like to take a moment to tell all the students who want to join Professor Ravi's lab in their future that you should be passionate and your basics should be clear. The fundamentals should be clear before you approach him. And if you get the opportunity to interview, then probably now you know the mantras to get in there. So now we'll talk about the expectations of a PI and expectations of a student. You have been through both the places over and over and over. What are the things which a student should see before contacting you? And what are the things which you see when you get a resume, an email of a student that, which I'm sure that you get every day, that I want to join your lab.
That's
And
true.
they just the way they approach and the way you want them to approach, how these two things are different.
Yeah, I mean, there are some fundamental things which one should not do. Is to at least they should know about the lab, read about the lab, not write sir slash madam. That's not a great way to write emails. And sometimes people use big words like I use the word passion myself, but they can write like that and just you can see the font of autophagy is just different, which means that in the entire covering letter they must have been sending it to many people. They have not made it personalized. But few students write in great detail that they've read a particular paper, and after reading that paper, they liked it for some reason, they did not like it for some reason, and then there are some outstanding questions. If the content of the letter or while talking to a student, if I find that there is something bothering the student in terms of some lack of knowledge that is there about a field which that student wants to pursue as a potential research problem, whether we go in that direction or not doesn't matter. But the fact that somebody is thinking deeply about a question or a field and trying to find out what is known, what is unknown, and how to address it. Can we do something about this? Can we think about it? I think overall, I've seen all over the world, this is what researchers look for. They want somebody who's really thinking about a project already, or has read, has done the background work, and is looking at the gaps in the field and thinking about experimental strategies to address them. These are really great combinations. Very difficult to find sometimes, but sometimes when you find them, you feel that this is the student more than the student wanting to join my lab. I want the student to join my lab.
There is no bad student. A teacher can be bad, but student cannot be. And that's
Absolutely.
exactly
Yeah.
what you said. So now walking the students, how responsible, because this is something which often come in our researcher celebrity conversation, that in India, the supervisor or the advisor for the PhD don't feel very responsible for their students post their PhD or till their settlement. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think we get intricately associated with students. It so happens that some of their best youthful years they're spending in the lab doing all kinds of research, which is not very rewarding most of the times. And I think detaching ourselves so much that it's almost impossible. You have to cater to their needs. Every student is different. What makes them go low, what takes them on a high, how you can persist them and encourage them. It's a different game, but some few things are there, I think, which I learned during my PhD and postdoc, is that you need to have excellent hobbies. You need to have great friends. And so these are the couple of things that if you have, I feel that no matter what happens while doing research, you always come back fresh and you're ready to tackle that problem. And one small thing that I learned that helps me is time management, because time is a in the back of your mind. You're always I'm second year is over, third year is fourth is over. People are publishing. What am I doing? And these kind of problems come. So there are a few time management skills which I have learned, and through some courses and things like that, which I very quickly imparted to my students. So they become the master of their time. And so then they are able to come and talk. And failure is never considered bad. So my students are the first ones to come and say, I did this stupid mistake and this failed. And then I'm like, fantastic. Only don't do the super stupid mistake again. Let's see how we can go forward. And there is no bad blood about such things. And that helps them, I think, not get too much stressed what the supervisor will say. But the challenge is always on them. Once there is clarity about how the experiment has to be done and what is the time period for that, they take it upon themselves that I have that expertise. How can I do it? And then after that, there is always a reward of a break. They can do whatever their hobbies. They can take off. They can listen to music, go travel, meet home, family. So and come back again.
Now, this brings us to one of the most important questions which we always try to discuss at this platform is like the failure and the stress it brings. People often say that not every experiment or not even half of them are successful in terms of data generation,
Yeah, yeah,
which means all these failed experiments with small, starting from very small stress levels and then turning into a snowball effect. And at the time when students have quit their PhD after 3, 4, 5 years, and in very sad cases, committing the suicide.
yeah.
So I would like to know your thoughts and recommendations to the students who are currently doing their PhD or postdoctoral training and going through a tough time, how they should come out of that.
I so again, there are many ways to answer that. But as we discussed before, I feel that it's the support system that end of the day, if you have a solid support system, you feel that you can go home, without worrying about it. So right now, my wife, my son, they're my greatest support systems, my extended family. And so what happens is that at the end of the day, even if you had a tough day in office, you feel that you can talk about it, you can share about it with people. And I think having a mentorship network where your PI is not the only mentor, but there are other people with whom you can talk science. They could be senior professors, senior students, colleagues, anybody whom you can openly chat about. I think is very important. Many times, talking through difficult situations and looking at very different perspectives helps a lot. I'll just give an example. I had a great colleague during my PhD, and her thought process was always, I felt, completely refreshing and different than what I used to feel. Even in the most difficult situations, if I feel that it's hopeless, she would point out at four different things that I could have done and can do rather than sitting and worrying about. There's a very famous book, Old Men and the Sea. And if you read about it, I thought it was a very depressing book. And whereas she always thought the character was very selfish. And so I thought having people with very different and fresh perspectives who are positive in life can really motivate. And actually, having great hobbies, I was telling you, helps you because when you do those hobbies, it takes your mind off. Some people are creative in drawing, some people are good at sports, some in music, and any of those are very good.
So now, when we talk about this, that people still, drop out of their PhD. Suicide is the
Yes.
extreme, and anyone can go. According to you, what goes wrong with them, and at what level we can save the misery of the student as well as for a supervisor? Because now you are in this supervising position for a long time.
Yeah, yeah,
I can assure that it is very painful for a supervisor to see the student struggling. So
absolutely.
how we
It's
can break this chain of the misery?
Yeah, I think again, earlier when we were doing, there was only the second year, there was an intervention possible to find out whether a student is doing fine or not. And after that, there was no process or intervention till somebody finishes PhD or does not finish PhD. So that was an alarming thing. And sometimes it was not therefore uncommon that somebody would finish a PhD without any paper. It was more like just get the PhD and get out of the place kind of. But now I think in many, many places, they have really good, uh, what do you call, intermediate committees that are formed that can periodically monitor the progress. And if there are any red flags, you don't wait long enough. many times things go to a breakdown point because you just waited so long that you don't feel that in the next 1 or 2 years you can finish the PhD, and then the relationship between PhD supervisor and yourself also breaks down because expectations are completely different. And when fail, success, I mean, when things fail, there will be so many reasons to blame. You will point fingers at somebody, that person will point fingers at back at you, and so on. So to avoid all that, we have something called graduate students advisory committee, 2 to 3 people from within the field, inside the institute, outside the institute. They all come together, and every year the plan is discussed. As can we do we need to realign the work? Do we need to look for other opportunities to get some data? How can we now convert whatever you have into a story in the next 1 year or so when we meet again? And I think that dialogue, basically opening more and more frequent dialogue, I think it sort of optimizes the expectations on both the sides to an equilibrium so that both all of them are on the same page. I think if that is not done, over the years we drift. I will say that person has still not done that experiment. I told him so many times to do that experiment, one experiment is. And the other student can be like, I did 10 experiments, but he still wants that experiment. So this kind of small things can snowball very quickly. And if there is nobody to intervene and suggest or diffuse the situation, then it's like a relationship breaking down, right? It's always between the PI and the student, and it's not an equal relationship all the time. So it's very painful at the end.
So now we spoke about the relationship with this like this, but when we see about the peers, like the lab environment, because this is something which we always say that you might not feel comfortable talking to your PI the way you are comfortable talking to your friends, to your lab members, and to anywhere, like, because now with this advanced technology, people have network all around the globe. So if a person is facing a challenge in India, they can contact a professor in Japan, in United States, in Europe, anywhere,
That's true.
and then get, result to this. But the question here is the way a supervisor mentor their student, that they are not limited to the lab for research purposes, for the questions, and for the solutions also. We have seen labs which works entirely on their own. So there is zero collaboration. And on the counterpart, there are labs which do so much collaboration that not even many people know that how many members are there in lab, because they always have people coming and going. So their lab members
Yes.
are doing their experiment somewhere else. So this is something very good when we talk about the scenario second. And we have seen India is growing this culture little by little.
Yes.
Your suggestions and recommendation to the students who are thinking to start their PhD, that how they should look at the profile and the collaborations of the professor.
So one thing is becoming very clear nowadays, that publishing in very good journals is extremely difficult. Um, it takes almost like an year sometimes that once your paper is under review, that it will get published. Now, why I'm saying this is because papers now expect a complete story. Earlier, based on a laboratory's experience and the key skills that they had, using only that much, it was enough to report something. Now, people, because they want a complete story, you need to have multiple expertise of different diverse techniques and research models and things like that. It's almost virtually impossible to have all of that in the same lab. So, a new student should realize that if they're going to work on something, some important question, and that to address that question, it's not going to be possible that one has to rely only on the laboratory skills. Then what's going to happen is they are going to very quickly wanting to collaborate. So looking at labs publications in terms of how collaborative papers have been, and also talking to the PI that look, maybe we can do these experiments in your lab, but eventually we may require to do this kind of experiments. So if you don't have that research ability or expertise or the require or the instrumentations in the lab, how can we do it? And you can see now it's very easily people reach out saying that this much is our expertise, so this part will be done in our lab, and then maybe the student can go to another lab and then do some work there and come back and so on. So those kind of openness should be looked very carefully based on the recent publications in the lab and having an open and fair conversations with the PI. As you rightly said, some people are still living in the previous century and stick to their good old techniques and don't want to really collaborate at all. And sometimes are even proud that they have never collaborated with anybody. And I think those days are over.
So this is something for which I'll say to all the students that being vocal is one thing, as Dr. Ravi just mentioned, about being vocal in the sense that you have thought your experiment through. You know what portion of your project you can do in the lab and for what portion you really need a collaboration. If a PI is not very supportive of that, so you know that by joining that lab, you are going to spoil your and the lab environment completely because it has been clearly said that, okay, no, we are not going to do this. If you really want to pursue, and this is one of the things which will give you results only after 5 years because you can always spend your 5 years in a lab, get your PhD and go out. But what you lost there is the possibility of networking, possibility of like diversifying your own skills because this is what is going to take you to the next level. So I saved this question for the last, and now we are coming towards the edge of the conversation. When they say publish or perish, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's one of the toughest questions. I mean, it's no brainer that we use many times government money, taxpayers' money. That's one way of looking at it.
Mhm.
Second way also is that many a times we have thought about a very important research question that nobody else is doing in the world, and everybody's, like my PhD boss would say, time, money, and efforts have gone into it, and publication is in some way has to be the ultimate uh, readout of that process, and I think it's an essential skill. I have seen that, including me, it's a challenge every time to convert a story or research results into a good publication. That skill set is of utmost importance. There are people who can write very good papers based on limited data, and then there are people who have fantastic data and have never published it. And in both ways, if you look at it, having a skill set, at the end of the day, we become a salesman. We have to tell the world what we did in our lab, sitting 24/7, working 365 days. What has been the outcome, right? It is important to convey to the world, and many times those, I think, results are important. We may not feel it that way sometimes, but there may be somebody who's reading it, if not now, maybe several years later or several months later, and they find something useful for them, and it may save their time and their efforts also in addressing those questions. And there was a very good professor in ISC who once said sometimes science is incremental, which means we may not get very excited because we added a small piece to it, but those pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle, make the full picture. So not publishing and not getting your students to publish, I don't think it's a very fair way. It's not an easy
Absolutely.
job to do, but I think it's a supervisor's responsibility to keep an eye and how to convert almost all that good data that we have gotten in the lab in some form of publication.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, like even the data which is not so good or negative in sometimes when we say in there, I always tell this to students whosoever I interact with and through this podcast that whatever data you have done, whatever experiments you have done in your lab, if they are not published, that means they were never done. So you might have spent
Absolutely.
your 5 years doing something, but just because you have not published, there will be more aspirants like so many others doing the same thing, spending the 5 years again and
Absolutely.
again and again, just because nobody took the time to convert that story into a piece and then publish it. So it is very important. And as Professor Ravi also said, it is incremental. You might not be very, super enthusiastic about some piece of research, but what we always say that research is a teamwork always. Even for the professors who have never collaborated in their lifetime, they are using somewhere some data which was generated in some other lab. So they accept or not, but they have collaborated with them without acknowledging them, or I cannot say acknowledging because whenever they are publishing paper, they are citing their work, which means they acknowledge that collaboration. So with this, we'll say we will ask the last word of wisdom from Professor Ravi to the new generation of researchers, how they should approach research.
Well, I feel that I always learn nowadays. Past few years, I students do so much research on their own. Now Chat GPT is there. You can ask question to Chat GPT, perhaps it will give you a better answer than me. But I think, like everybody says, you have to follow your passion. You have to understand your passion many times. You have to have the knowledge of many subjects. So I would say not fall prey to the notion that this is my favorite subject and that is not my favorite subject. But so long as you're a student, try to understand the all the subjects what they are teaching you, and see what starts staying in your mind more and more. And that's what you will find that you are more inclined to. And there's nothing wrong in pursuing that and seeing if you can make a career out of it. Everybody will point out at many possibilities, but at the end of the day, you should follow what your heart says, because in the long run, that's what is going to give you happiness, not a
Yes.
big fat salary and a job.
And this is something which we always say, do whatever makes you happy. And if research happens to be one of them, we are there to support you in all the capacity which we have. And with this, we'll say to all the audience that if you want to connect to Professor Ravi, you can Google him. He's all over the web. And if you want Empowering Science Foundation to put you in touch with our researcher celebrities, we are there to help you. We can only help and guide you. The passion you have to bring on your own. And with this, we'll say thank you, Professor Ravi, for sharing the journey as well as the guidance to the students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Raja. Thank you.